So, for instance, my third book was about Roald Amundsen, who was the first guy to reach the South Pole and get back safely. So a lot of that book I wrote while I was training long distances to swim in different areas of the world. So I'd be thinking about, who do I need to interview? Where can I get the books on him? I would think about who his mentors were. And so while I'm swimming, I'm thinking about a lot about what I'm working on. And I have a friend named Oliver Sacks, who's one of the world's most known neurologists, and he's a swimmer. And when I was back in New York City, the first time I met him, he said, "Do you want to go for a swim?" I'm like, "Yeah." So we met, and we went to Riverside, which is the very top part of Manhattan, and swam together. And when he got out of the water, he had a notepad, and he just started writing down all this stuff. And I said, "What are you doing, Oliver?" He said, "Oh, I get all these ideas while I'm swimming, and I don't want to forget any of them." And I looked at him, I went, "Wow, that's what I do too." So for me, the swimming is at times really meditative. At times I'm thinking about structuring my day. At times I'm writing, and times I'm just figuring out what's next in life. There are times where there have been swims that I've done that were really upsetting, where things really didn't work out the way I expected them to go. I was invited when I was 17 years old to swim in the Nile River in Egypt. And I had gotten dysentery the week before I swam. So I was very dehydrated before I jumped in, but felt like I was the only American invited to swim in this race. And I'd been invited because the Egyptians have this thing about the English Channel, because at one point, England and France controlled the Suez Canal. And so there was this huge prestige in swimming across the English Channel. And actually, there are streets named after Egyptian swimmers in Cairo. So I swam about 15 miles of the 20-mile swim, and it was really awful. I wound up swimming through pools of dead rats and stuck my hand through a dead dog that sort of exploded around me. And there was an area where there had been areas where they had put up things to keep mines from washing ashore. The Egyptians were afraid in 73 that the Israelis would mine the river. And so because these areas were set up, you had to swim very close to shore, and when you did, you stuck your hand into the water, and then you pulled an armful of muck with each stroke. And as I was swimming, I started cutting my hand on glass. So I was like 17 years old, and I really wasn't very happy and wasn't feeling very good. And at that 15-mile mark or so, I sort of passed out and wound up in the hospital. But this was the big thing. I had an amazing doctor who was Egyptian, who had been trained in Britain, who spoke fluent English. And, you know, they were giving me fluids, and they were giving me stuff to make my muscles stop cramping, and they were helping me feel better and warming me up. There was some kind of hot blanket on me. And so I was thinking about, I failed, I gave up, I quit, I did awful. And so he was asking me, you know, like reassuring me, you're okay, you're okay, you're in good hands, you're warming up, you're getting rehydrated. It's like, no, I'm not, I didn't make it. And he's like, yes, you did, you made it, you're here. And I go, but I didn't finish the swim. So talk about having things out of perspective. You know, it's like, wow, I realize that there's no swim worth ever getting that sick over. And so when I've done these different swims, I will, if things look bad, I will get out of the water if things aren't good. And actually I was in New York a few days ago speaking to a group of open water swimmers, and there was one swimmer who said, I want to swim in the Harlem River as part of the race around Manhattan Island. So I just know that I'm going to swim through lots of sewage. So how do I prepare myself psychologically for doing that? And my response is, these swims are about being healthy, about stretching yourself, about finding about what you can do, exploring. They're not about getting sick. So I'd say I wouldn't swim it. And she looked at me like, I can't believe you're saying that. And like, I wouldn't swim it. I wouldn't psych myself up to do that. It's not worth my health. And it's so funny because where was I last night? I was in a different state yesterday. I was in Virginia, and I was talking to a woman who had tried to do the Manhattan swim, and she actually made it. But she said she had swum with 12 friends, and she's the only one that didn't get really sick afterwards. And she said because she was using scope throughout the swim to wash out her mouth as she did the swim. And I thought, no, this isn't worth it. So I think that's what I tried to convey in this book too, that there are certain things that will allow you to do what you can do, but you need to set up that infrastructure in advance, and you need to have people around you that are really good that you can count on. When I did a swim in Antarctica, there was a doctor on board the boat who was a ship's doctor, and he was like the most negative force you could ever have. And he really wanted something. I just felt I felt like he really wanted something bad to happen so that he could be the one who rescued me. And so I had 3 doctors who had seen me through the years who were my friends, and I basically said, "You're my buffer. Whatever I need to do to please this guy, I will, but please keep him away from me." And so that's what I did to be able to do that swim. And that's the other thing, is you don't want negative energy around you, because it's already challenging, and you're already dealing with, I mean, when I jumped into the water in Antarctica, it was 32 degrees. And the coldest water I could train in to that point was 38. There's a huge difference between 32 and 38. So you don't need anything messing with your mind when you're trying to do something like that.
Lynne, on a similar vein as that story about the Nile swim, is there any other swim that got away from you, so to speak? Was there a swim that you sort of had your eye on, or for whatever reason you weren't able to tackle it, you weren't able to make it happen?
Actually, I think that was really the big one, and and it was lucky that it happened early on, because shortly after that, I was trying to swim across the Catalina Channel. My goal was to swim the Catalina Channel a second time and break all the records. And during that swim, I had a 40-foot dive boat, and then I had a rowboat with 2 lifeguards on board, and then a swim coach who was on a long paddleboard. And we started at midnight because the water's a lot calmer at night. And I think we got 4 hours into the swim, and the fog suddenly came in, and we lost the main boat. And then quickly after that, we lost the dory. And then shortly after that, I lost the paddler on the board next to me. And it was really frightening to be in the middle of the Catalina Channel, feeling the large animals swimming below, because you could feel that, but also you could feel the passing bow waves of ships. They would suddenly emerge from nowhere and break around you. So it was really terrifying. Within, say, 3 or 4 minutes, I was able to find the guy on the paddleboard. What I learned then is to never have a coach is only a pool swimming coach who's never been out in the ocean as your main guy beside you. Learning experiences. But the thing was that he was telling me, just keep swimming. Keep going. Don't stop, because you're going to get cold, but just keep swimming. And I think because of all those years of working out offshore and talking to the lifeguards before I went in, I just remembered something about, if you get lost in the fog, don't keep moving. Stay where you are so that people can find you. If you start moving off, it'll make it more difficult. And so he insisted that I start swimming, and so he started paddling away, and I just grabbed the board. And when I did that, I disqualified myself, which was like the last thing in the world I ever wanted to do. But I disqualified myself, and maybe half an hour later, the dory found us, and they had a walkie-talkie, and maybe it was like 45 minutes to an hour later, the boat found us. So that swim got away from me, but what it did is he taught me a lot, and 2 weeks later, I went back, and I swam, and I broke all records for the Catalina Channel. So thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
You must have incredible parents. How in the world, like when I read your books to my high school students, they always had the question, how did her parents deal with her swimming, like in the middle of the night, like in Grayson when you're, out there in the dark? So that's one question I have, like, how did your parents deal with that? And then also, you have encountered critters. And so I know, like, you talked about thinking of things you had to do or read, but if you actually have like a huge animal, like, how is it that you're able to still stay out there and not like zoom into shore like in Grayson? And I just have
that's
two questions. Your parents, and then
thank you. Remind me. Actually, my parents were extremely supportive and moved us from New Hampshire to Southern California so we could train with the U.S. Olympic coach. And when I was training offshore, my mom or dad would walk the beach with me to help me establish pace. When I swam the Catalina Channel the first time, my dad came on board the ship as the boat as the ship's doctor. They were really, really supportive. But when I started doing swims that were like in Antarctica, my mom was just sort of shaking her head and saying, why do you want to swim in 32-degree water in a swimsuit, cap, and goggles? I know you love to swim, but what is that all about? And I said, well, I've done all these other swims. And I said, you're an artist and you paint. Why do you have to paint? And she looked at me as if she's like, oh, I get it now. And I didn't have to say anything anymore. That sort of tension through all those years of, why do you push further? Why do you need to do this? It's just like, I can't explain it. It's just what I need to do. The other question was animals. Yeah. Right. When I swim, the second book I wrote was Grace, and it was about a baby gray whale that got lost its mom. While I was training offshore, it came over and started swimming underneath me, and the water was pitch black, and I was swimming alone, stuff I would never do now, but at 17 years old, I was just training very close to shore, and the story evolves because there's an old fisherman that's on the pier that tells me to just keep swimming, stay with the baby gray whale until his mom comes. But initially, I don't know that that isn't a gray whale. And I'm swimming along and I'm feeling the water hollowing out underneath me. And I'm thinking, hey, it's too big for a seal. It's too big for a dolphin. Maybe it's a shark. So I move closer to shore. And I think that what I was realizing then was that if I freaked myself out during a training swim, there's no way that I could ever swim across Catalina Channel or anywhere else. So it was trying to be in control. But I think something different. The sharks off the coast of California, there have been very few shark attacks. And I think that maybe off the coast of Florida, there are more shark attacks. The other thing that I wrote about in the book is that less than one person a year worldwide is killed by a shark. And there are over 100,000 sharks killed each year by people for finning and soup and stuff like that. So it's sort of in proportion. But I don't want to be less than that one person. So I check out the areas where I swim and I talk to my shark research people and then go from there. Hi.
What's the most amazing thing you've seen on your swim? Like the most beautiful / amazing?
Land. It's always good to see when you're out in the middle of the water for hours and hours and hours, and finally in the distance you can see the finger of a peninsula. But no, there's so many different things. I mean, I love swimming off the Florida coast. I love swimming off the Florida coast because the water's so beautiful and aquamarine and clear and all that. But I also love swimming off the California coast because of the phosphorescence. And so when you're swimming, your fingers are sparkling and you're blowing out into the water and you're seeing round bubbles of air that are glowing. And I remember the first Catalina swim, there were flying fish that were leaping out because they were attracted by the boat's lights, and they had the phosphorescence on them, so they were glowing neon pink and blue and purple, and it was very much like you suddenly had, went to Disneyland. I think there are moments where there are times where you're just so tired and you can't go any further, and I think one of the most beautiful sights I ever saw were the dolphins in Cook Straits who came over and swam with us to keep me going for hours and hours and hours. So many. And that's why I do this, because you don't know what to expect. And, it's just exciting to be out there. People ask me to swim with them in the swimming pool, and I go, I can't do it anymore. I can't. It's just too controlled.
You recall your experience when you returned the baby whale to its mother?
Oh yeah, actually the mother swam over and found us, and I think I've thought a lot about that through the years, and I think that she must have retraced her fluke prints or something like that, because she wound up coming back to the end of the pier, that area where she, I don't know when she first lost him, but it was really exciting because there were people on the pier. They were looking for Grayson's mother. I called him Grayson because he was the son of the gray whale, so his name became Grayson. And actually, it's really weird because I get notes from people now who name their kids after Grayson the whale. I'm like, oh. And then I just sort of a digression, but just the other day, a woman emailed me to tell me that she had been reading Grayson to her 4-year-old daughter who had a stuffed gray whale. So she was walking through the house making the gray whale move as if he was swimming and singing to him, saying, saying, "We'll find your mommy, Grayson, we'll find your mommy." So it's just amazing how people connect in different ways with a story. I forgot what I was telling you. At the very end of the swim, thank you. The mom came in very close to me, and I was very scared because she was probably 45 feet long. And I wasn't sure, you're always told never get between a mom bear and the cub. And so I'm thinking, I guess you don't want to get between the mom gray whale and the gray whale baby. But she came right over to me and let me touch her. And I had been able to touch Grayson before that. And now, years and years and years later, that story came to be when I was 17 years old. And I knew so little about gray whales and marine mammals in particular. But because of that story, I wound up meeting a bunch of marine mammal experts. And so one of them was telling me that he would go down to Scammons Lagoon off the coast of Mexico to where the babies were born. And he said he remembered one day where the mother whale came over to him with her baby beside the mom, and she scooped up the baby and put the baby on her stomach as if to say, "This is my new baby, see it." And she let him touch the baby and the mom and herself. So it was just like, wow, there are other stories often where you hear about gray whales going over to boats, and the whales will let people scratch and touch them. I didn't know any of that when I was 17 years old, so it was kind of weird to be swimming with a baby whale. It was just like, but all I could think of is if this was a stray dog and it had lost its mom or its home, I'd be trying to find its home. So the old fisherman was right that I just needed to stay with a baby whale and it would find its mom. The whale found him, I think.
Did you swim the Cape of Good Hope? And if you did, could you tell us something about that?
I think you read the first book. I think you read Swimming to Antarctica. Yes, I was the first person to swim around the Cape of Good Hope at the tip of Africa. And the thing that made it very challenging was that there were really big waves. They're about 12 to 15, some were 20 feet high to go out through during the swim. But when you swim around the Cape of Good Hope, there's the Atlantic Ocean, and it's about 20 to 30 degrees cooler than the Indian Ocean. The water temperature, I think it was like in the high 50s, and I think in the water in the Indian Ocean, it was pretty much in the high 70s. And the color is different. It's like a lapis blue in the Indian Ocean, and it's like a robin egg blue in the Indian Ocean. And the densities feel different. When you swim in the Atlantic, the water feels really thick and rich and heavy. And when you stroke through it, you get really good pools. When you swim in the Indian Ocean, it's like very thin, because it's so much warmer, and the buoyancy feels different. But the point was, I was trying to become the first person to swim around the Cape of Good Hope, and I had the equivalent of the South African Special Forces team with me. They were South African police, and they learned how to do all sorts of search and rescue, and they tell me these horrific stories that they would dive in these black pools that were full of roots, and they would go to find weapons that had been dumped into them or bodies that were caught in the roots of the trees, and they would have to go down into these black waters and try not to get the rope that they were attached to snagged and find whatever they were looking for. So these guys also, for fun, would go spearfishing around the Cape of Good Hope. And because of the mixing of the waters, there's a lot of plankton, there's a lot of fish, there's a lot of seals, there's a lot of food for sharks, so there's a lot of sharks. So when I was doing the swim, I had these South African police guys watching the water, taking 20-minute shifts, and they had a spear gun in their hand, and every 20 minutes one guy would climb out and the other one would get in. Off to my right was a Zodiac boat with 2 South African swimmers and then 2 crew members that were navigating the Zodiac, and then the larger ski boat was on my left side. I was about 400 meters from finishing the swim when Doug, the diver who had been beside me, was suddenly gone. And all I saw was the rope, like in the water. So I yelled to the crew, "Where's Doug?" And the wind was blowing at 35 knots, and the water was so rough that they couldn't see below the water to see where Doug was. So then the Zodiac yelled to the people on board the main boat, and they all looked, and they couldn't see him either. So all of a sudden they just yelled, swim for shore, like sprint, go as fast as you can. So I'm like, okay. And the two South African swimmers jumped in the water with me, and we sprinted to shore with a Zodiac boat. About 5 minutes after I landed on shore, the Zodiac arrived behind me, and on board was Doug. And he stepped out, and he was stretching out the spear. And I said, what happened, Doug? Are you okay? He said, yeah, I'm okay, no problem. I go, well, but what happened? He said, well, a 12-foot bronze whaler, a migratory shark from the Red Sea, had moves down into that water in December and February. And this 12-foot shark had come up out of the water for me. And he shot it in the dorsal fin, and the shark just turned and bit the spear and pulled it out of its side and swam off. And he was okay, and he said the shark would be okay, and the swim was successful, and I decided that's the last time I'm swimming in South African waters. And I keep getting invited back, but I think, I'm not going to push my luck.
Because I am really interested in like conquering fear. Like how do you conquer that fear? Like in one of your books, I was reading about how you saw the brown fin come up.
Right.
And it ends up being something else.
Oh, yes,
But-
yes. Thanks for not saying what that was. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But what's the best way to conquer fear of something real, though?
Well, I think for me, the best way to conquer the fear is to prepare. So the more I can train, the better prepared I am, but also have the crew around me, like those guys from South Africa. I felt safe with them. They did exactly what they needed to do. They were pros. They dove off there. They spearfished. When they spearfished, they put blood in the water. They had sharks around them. They were really knowledgeable. So I felt really confident about them. I still was afraid. I mean, before that swim, I had nightmares about sharks chasing me. But I think that was also my way of being prepared for if something happened. And so when something did happen, it was like sprint to shore. And they could have easily pulled me out of the water, but I think the crew thought that things were under control and it would be okay. I also think that visualizing helps to diminish the fear. I remember the English Channel swim, my first time. I'd never been to France. I'd never been to England. And so I remember getting out a map and looking at the course or where I thought the course might be and started memorizing it and looking at the land on both sides and try to figure out what the water would be. And then I had a friend who had swum it, and he started giving me the input of what it would be like. So I think that the more I can acquaint myself with whatever I'm going to do in advance, the easier it becomes. But also the infrastructure has to be there. At one point, we had discussed using a shark cage for my Cape of Good Hope swim. And the problem with that was that it would give me 30% drag. So I wouldn't be making it under my own power. But the other thing is that if it got really rough, I'd be thrashed around in the cage and could get all caught up. But the other thing, too, is that there were big waves that were generated in Antarctica. And in summer, the waves could just be rogue waves that suddenly rose out at 20 to 30 feet high. And that was kind of scary to think about. But what they said is if you're in a cage, it will take the cage down and the boat as well. So I opted to use the guys instead of the cage. And so I think that just doing all that research and acquainting myself and getting the best crew and all that helps me a lot.
Swim from Miami to Havana.
I'll leave that for other people.
Diana Nyad. Folks, we have Open Water Swimming Manual as well as Lynne's previous books for sale at the counter over there. She's going to be signing over there at the table to the left of the podium, and those were some fantastic stories. Please, let's give her a hand. Thanks very much.